If I need a book, you might not have a book. I need a question. Oh, Sophia. Okay, Sophia is the only one that doesn't have a book. Good.
Hey, besides you that's read the whole.
She didn't read the whole book. So that let's put that.
I didn't even read through the whole thing.
All right, I'm super excited. Also a little nervous. So we went to a minor league game last night, and I was telling the kid, we were trying to describe him what the minor league was, as opposed to major leagues, and everything's like, well, they're in preparation. They do some bad, get kicked back down. I was like, I'm going up to the majors tomorrow when I'm teaching. I was like, if Steven's gonna be in there, it's like if something goes wrong, I was like, back to 4th and 5th. You know, it's like quadruple A. You know, you work for free. It's not good. I'm just kidding. 4th and 5th graders. If you take 4th and 5th, you get that joke. No, it's true. No, I'm excited. I haven't taught adults in a long time, and I don't think I've ever taught a full-on quarter for adults. So I'm a little nervous and all doing my hands. Kids, you know, they just assume you know everything. And adults, so it's like just the opposite. You know, just who's this guy? Or at least that's how I treat. But I should. But no. I know Eli is on. He's joining us on Zoom, so that's cool. I gave him the goal of text me and I'll feel it and I'll read. And we'll have our first like virtual interaction. So if he's there, it's been set. So this is kind of an interesting class. Before I really like took it on, I agreed to see like, oh yeah, I can do that. And then I started looking at it. I was like, man, I don't know if I should have said yes. My clicker's not working, which is great. Great way to start.
I think you're the right person to say yes, though, Ryan. Because I don't know if everybody knows your personal history, like a few of us in the room do.
I was in a cult.
But you were not in a.
That one? No.
But you were not raised in the church.
Right.
And so you had to come to it from an honest perspective.
Yeah. And I appreciate that. And I do think it kind of that does make a difference. And so I'm going to ask questions throughout this that might be a little more pointed. And so there's kind of a long disclaimer we'll have in a second. We'll go over that. But before we start, I guess I've already started, but before Zach yells at me, memory verse, they'll join. When they did not find them, they drank Jason, his brethren, rulers of the city, crying out, these who have turned the world upside down have come here too. So calendar kind of events. You think about it, if you were given a class to say, hey, teach about cults and religions, what would you pick? This is what I did. So everybody's got their opinions on kind of what should be included. This is what I went with. So cults is a very ambiguous topic. So I'm gonna do my best to jump into it. I titled it The Allure of the Mystical, because that's it seems a lot of conversations I've been having with family, friends, anybody. It has to do with this mystical aspect of a lot of this. And that's I think it's the allure of the mystical is exactly what it is. It's like people looking for something. So we're going to talk about conspiracy theories next week, which I'm really looking forward to. No one on this side of the room, I'm going to ask any questions, especially Eric. Just kidding. So, and then irreligion, Satanism, hedonism, that's a whole lot of isms, but it's basically the cult of you, looking to yourself for pure, full edification, purpose of life. We're going to talk about Jehovah's Witnesses for 2 weeks, Islam, and then we're going to have a presentation by Billy, which is a preacher we support in India. This is the plan of this, Lord willing. We'll have an actual Zoom call with a mic. He's already agreed to do this, so he's going to be up at who knows what time, on live for us. So I think it's going to be really cool. We might have to all like sit closer together so everybody can be picked up on the mic. So I'll have something on backup in case something crazy happens technically. And then Mormonism, and then the last 2 classes are more scenario based, so we'll have a lot of conversation. And I really want this class to be heavy conversation, because we're going to deal a lot with opinions and how would you handle this situation? What would you say to someone? And that inherently is an opinion based thing. And so let's make sure I'm not jumping too far ahead. I'll get to that in just a second. But goals we want to cover. This is in the book, but just to cover the basics of these individual beliefs, especially the religions. Disclaimer, I'm not an expert on any of those. So if you know something, please, don't let me say something wrong about it. Let me give them a fair shake and tell me if I'm wrong. We'll approach that together. And then identify and discuss why individuals or even sometimes Christians are drawn to these false doctrines, especially on the conspiracy theory side. I mean, I personally know multiple people that I've worked with. I mean, well, my current boss and my previous boss have been conspiracy theorists. I hope they're not listening to this. Like, I mean, full on affects their lives. You're making radical life decisions based on this type thing. Okay, so this is in my little circle, you know. So I'm just extrapolating. It's probably something y'all see as well. Which I think it's like, man, we need to really talk about this then. And then number 3 and 4, discuss methods each of us can employ to guard our own hearts, implementation, and lead our families to become more acceptable. And then openly and candidly discuss methods each of us have used in communicating God's word to members of these organizations. That's a big one. Our theme, turning the world upside down, evangelism, preaching. It's one thing I really didn't want to get into, like heavy, especially Jehovah's Witnesses. If you've been in a lot of those classes before, it's okay, that church was established on this date by this guy. It's kind of like a history class. That's important and it serves a purpose, especially when you're talking to those people about how that started. But what's the actual doctrinal beliefs as opposed to the Bible? So I want to, because that's how I think, at least when you're talking to them, you're going to be able to convince them or have a conversation with them of centering around that. So that's what I really want to get into, is how would you take this topic and talk to someone that is in that situation, or recognize if you're in that situation, how would you want to be approached? Whatever. So any comments on that? Oh, side note, if no one ever says anything, the default is just gonna be Sophia. So I'm gonna use some terrorist tactics. So that's what's gonna happen. All right, we've already discussed this. Exactly. So conversation, which I'll get into my stop, proceed with caution. So it doesn't escape me that 2 weeks ago I preached a sermon on not talking about opinions, not necessarily talking about, but preaching from opinions, necessary inferences, things on those lines. So this type of class, we can't have conversations like, well, hey, what do you think about this topic, or how would you approach X, without inherently diving into opinions of how would you do something. And all of us might have a little bit different spin on how we would do things. We might have a disagreement on what constitutes a cult or whatever. At the end of the day, let's just make sure that we basically take these 2 verses and apply them to who we are. So just to kind of set the mood for the class. A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. The tongue of the wise uses knowledge rightly, but the mouth of fools pours forth foolishness. It's Proverbs 16:1, and then Colossians 3, starting 12. Therefore, as the elect of God, holy and beloved, put on tender mercies, kindness, humility, meekness, long suffering. And then here's our verse: bearing with one another and forgiving one another. Anyone has a complaint against another, even as Christ forgave you, so you must also do. So point is, let's just tread lightly with each other and always give each other the benefit of the doubt, love one another, all of that. The book, I put this together, so if it's the worst thing you've ever read, that's on me. So there's QR codes in here, videos, so there'll be some questions that say, hey, if specifically JW is a great example. First time you meet one, they'll come up to you and be like, hey, can I show you this video? Very innocent thing. Sure. Bam. And so what we'll do is we'll talk. We'll actually pull the video up. This is my plan. We'll have some speakers. It's like 90 seconds. We'll watch this and be like, okay, you're in that situation. What would you say? Or where would you direct? What's the next step? Things like that. So I'm looking forward to that. I think that's cool. But with that said, that big caution, we are going to be talking about false doctrine. So if that's something maybe you might struggle with, or you find yourself like, oh, I don't know, what about this? Like that's okay. Like talk, bring that up, and you definitely don't have to do this. You can not look at those things if you don't want to, and still come, and it'll be highly productive. So it bothers me a lot of times, like just assuming everyone's okay with this. I want to make sure it's like enough disclaimers. So let's fix it. Yeah.
I have the kind of personality that I'm always seeking to learn something new, and I know this week. So I'm like, oh, I want to learn about this. It might be a form of ADD. I want to learn about this. I want to learn about this. And world religions and the history of religions, and specifically, I've been looking for traces of truth. Because in the patriarchal period, it became like basically a giant game of ancient telephone. You started out with some truth, and then it kind of devolved into the ancient religions. As I'm like, oh, Zoroastrianism. Yes, I would like to learn more about that. And then I reached this point in myself where I'm like, whoa, I feel overwhelmed by all this new information. And I have to go back to, okay, wait, what do I know is true? And I start with the very beginning. There has to be a God for these reasons. The Bible has to be his word. And I know this because go back through the evidences of Christianity's big three. There is a God, the Bible is his word, Jesus is his son. And I align my mind back to these things I know are true, and everything else I can ask questions about. And that is what separates the large church from anyone else who would put Christ on their label and say, no, you may not ask questions. The Lord said, yes, please ask questions.
Right. Yeah.
And, but you can always ground yourself back in these things I know absolutely to be true.
Right. You kind of have to have that anchor in order to swim out to those types. Because if not, then you're literally like being in a wave, just being tossed to and fro. You're all over the place. And I think that's a big draw for this that we'll get into here in a second. That there are people that are searching for more. And I think this is like, I don't, in one of these classes too, at least I always have a temptation of kind of like poking fun, like, how could that person believe this? You know, like, man, that'd be messed up. But, and I'll say this in the Muslim class, like, if I was born in Saudi Arabia 30 years ago, what are the chances that I'd be a Christian? Very, very low. I mean, it's possible, and the truth is there, but statistically, it'd be almost not possible. So, don't be too high-handed, or on the high horse, what we're going to say. So, anyways, that's yeah. Thank you. Let's get this one. So, what is a cult? This is the question I struggled with creating this specific class more than probably any other one, because it's actually not an easy question. So, what do y'all think? I'll put the regular a couple of definitions up here, but when you think of a cult, what do you think of? Yeah.
One, it's an organization.
An organization? Okay, good starting point. Yeah.
You want to have some kind of like flamboyant type of leader.
Oh yeah. Charismatic, maybe? Yeah.
That's
Flamboyant, like Fibonacci.
yeah,
Just kidding.
lots of rules.
What's rules?
Yeah, the
Yeah,
new
it is.
term floating online is high demand religion.
Interesting. Okay, I hadn't heard that.
So mind control, behavioral control, financial control, time control, someone who's just trying to
All
suck.
right, we're gonna get the qualities in a minute. All right. But yes. No, it's
There has to be an absence of knowledge or an absence of truth of what's out there. Whether that's just a lack of people seeking it or somebody being sheltered from it or being, like you said, controlled from it.
the members.
The members not seeking truth or knowledge of what's around them in this religion, or it could be everything. But yeah, you just got to follow what is being told to you.
It's like blind type thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's worse that you're punished for seeking out.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll totally get into that.
It's usually where there's either one or a small group of people also who are seeking to gain power, sometimes sexual favors, money.
Did you watch the video?
I did.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's typically it all boils down to someone is getting something carnal.
Yes. Yeah. It's there's a Netflix series right now, which I don't know if anyone's ever referenced Netflix from a Bible class. So me and I are watching right now, it's on the Branch Davidian.
Yeah.
And it's really good. So I mean, careful, there's language and different things in there. But I mean, there's that's absolutely it. And we'll get into that. Here, so this is what, from a kind of definition standpoint, I like the bottom one better. So the first one's a religion regarding as unorthodox or spurious. I needed to look up spurious, it's fake, or fictitious. The second one, a small religious group that is not a part of a larger or more accepted religion and has beliefs regarded by many people as extreme or dangerous.
This small is not necessarily true because Mormonism is quite large, but
That's
it has other
totally
markers of cult.
Yeah, well, that and okay, so I think of the Bible verse about wide is the way that leads to death. You want to be on the small side, right? So I don't look at these as necessarily in and of itself bad, but to change thoughts, cult as a word, almost all the time, tell me if y'all think differently, it's a negative connotation. It's not something you want to be associated with, right? The other problem I had when I was looking at this is, cult isn't found in the Bible. There's, there talks about sex, things along those lines. But cult in and of itself, that word, that kind of not even concept, isn't in the Bible, but it's more of a modern word, and even more so, it's like being used more and more as it's kind of an insult. If you don't like someone and they're part of an organization you don't like, they're a cult. Yes, ma'am.
Do you think that's drawn from like the media attention, starting with the Heaven's Gate folks and the Jonestown?
Yeah, in the
The
like
media attention
70s.
drawn to all that stuff, and then of course the Branch Davidians and
Right,
anything that ends in death and fire
right.
just becomes a media sensation.
So I put on in the book on page 4, there's like a chart for the use of the word cult over time. You can see it's kind of it's leveled out more so, but yeah, it kind of exploded around the 70s. You know, I think there was one in the 50s.
The Moody's.
Yeah, I'll get to so here. So we're already talking about it, but what are some cults that when you think of cult, we already have a definition ish. We'll work that out inside it. What are some y'all think of?
Scientology.
Scientology, yeah. Which is funny because I didn't think of that one. So I totally missed Scientology. What else? So I mean, Branch Davidians are kind of a big one because I mean, especially here in there was a big political rally in Waco, and one of the headlines is like Waco troubled, home of the Davidians. Whatever. I mean, even now, that's harkening back to when was like almost 30 years ago now. The
We were in
standoff.
Shut your dirty mouth. That was the 90s.
Was it? Well, 30 years ago.
Watched it on TV when I was in math class.
Really?
Growing
Wow.
up.
The Moonies are in South Korea.
Oh yeah. So here's a question. What about the definitions had a religious tint to it? What about non-religion? So what are there other types of cults? And so
It's the same kind of, it's ideological possession is what Jordan Peterson calls it. It's when you get so entrenched in this elitist thinking that you become closed off to anything else.
like the elitist part, yeah.
That's what a lot of these are, is I have special knowledge that you can't have unless you join our group, or only our leader has it, and then you have to have this blind allegiance. That's what this ideology is. And people, it's just religion without a God is what it is.
So other types, think of any say subcategories.
Well,
So
there's one right now. It's been in the news with all the women, and they got tattooed,
That's next year.
right?
Next year.
Yeah, yeah. And that it's
Yeah.
it's like a totally
Yeah.
not religious, but just
So he was based in self-help,
yeah.
and it was
Oh,
actually,
that's
he,
right.
he actually plagiarized quite a bit from Scientology.
Back.
Yeah,
That North Korea is kind of outlier in my mind. I'm just thinking about,
that's true.
That's up to a question mark.
they didn't choose. They didn't choose that.
They're
And
trapped
so
in it.
they're trapped physically to exist in that country, but they're not trapped in their mind.
Mhm.
So at least they choose not to be. But I just all the others, a cult is somewhat, and the way I think about a cult is they're choosing to belong to it. It's not kidnapping someone and forcing them, but they end up choosing. Now, some of those, like Manson, is kidnapping, but they eventually chose.
What about like leaders of like Nazis? What do you think?
I think Nazis chose. That was a choice. They chose to adopt that philosophy. Now they could. That wasn't. That's just my view.
No, yeah, no,
That they chose to participate in that. Not everyone in the country chose to participate.
right, yeah. And I yes, ma'am.
Well, I'm not dismissing what you said. I mean, I agree with that. I'm just thinking about what you were saying earlier. When you're in something,
Yeah.
it's hard to think otherwise,
Mhm.
And again, I'm not disagreeing. I'm just trying to think. I know I've lived in France, and I just went to church there, and just everybody is so closed-minded to anything Christian. I mean, it's really
In France, in Europe.
In Europe?
general? Yeah.
in France, they're so like, I'm not gonna believe that. Like, I mean, even the
Secular.
kids, they're like, yeah, no, I'm atheistic. Like, they're very open about that. And you're like, ugh. I mean, it like hurts me to hear that, but they're just very, I don't know. I guess my point is when you're in that, again, I'm not disagreeing. I'm just saying, in my mind, I see it as this is your only thought. I guess,
That's part of the problem.
right.
I think what you're trying to delineate is what is a cult.
Yeah.
And so what's the definition? It's hard for me to, like in Romania, not many people are interested in hearing about Christianity, but they're not a part of a cult.
Mhm.
They're living in a government, Eastern Bloc, past country. There's still a lot of communist, thought in the country. but people have accepted the national religion, but it's not a cult. They've accepted it. No one's forcing them to do it, but there's a lot of societal things that would push them in that way, sort of like in a Muslim country. But you can think that way about, Catholicism or Jewish faith, all those things. There's still pressures, but it's not a cult. Why is that? Well, there's not a charismatic leader. There's not
Like Kim Jong-un.
behavior controls. There's not, what's that?
It's like Kim Jong-un. So that's what.
Yeah,
So-
North Korea is
so
a separate.
So this is kind of like why, I mean, this is like, I love this. This is good. So this is, what I want to kind of draw at is one, maybe a question is, does it matter what a cult is? I would say probably not. Like as far as rightly dividing God's word, it's more for us being able to use it almost like an expedient to be able to identify something and then address how we address that issue. So North Korea, maybe in a small circle, or I mean, the Amish, like I lived in upstate New York, and Amish was a big deal. I mean, that it's very cultish, from how I use that word. That's a hard thing to come from. I mean, Islam, something with 1 billion members, but how you would approach that person is maybe very similar to how, someone that is just how they view the world is fundamentally different.
I think that's Jennifer's point.
Yeah.
Is that, whether or not it's a cult or not, people have, traditional view, they've just been brought up a certain way. What we do with that in our country, you do with people that were brought up a certain way, but it's not necessarily a cult, but boy, it really exists a cult. So it does help us figure out how do we deal with that individual. We're trying to teach the gospel. We have to know where they're from.
I look at it as like a scale.
Yeah.
It's like, I know that's a cult. This is cultish.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
so.
Well, even the French called the Church of Christ a cult.
Oh, I got a slide on that. Yeah.
Like, so my
That's good.
definition and I
Totally,
think like
yeah.
surely it's not, but in their mind,
Right.
because it's so off of what
Yeah.
they would do.
I
in
keep
society.
that thought because I have thought that. Like,
That's why I didn't like your definition as much, because I think it's based solely on where you live. I like what culture you're in. Well, you could say to a certain degree that a Church of Christ would measure up to cultish, what you say is cultish, but if you add some of the other aspects to it, it won't measure up to that definition. I mean,
Right.
We don't look to a charismatic leader for authority. We don't,
well, you would say
like
Jesus if
people.
you're looking on the outside.
But
Or
Jesus,
whoever. Yeah.
but Jesus is not a man. He's not a physical, he is
Right.
God. So it's
But and
Those
maybe the right delineation is we all come from this with the right term would probably be bias. Like it depends on where we're at and how we look.
Well, that's exactly what I was gonna say is perspective, right? Because NRA, right? There's a group of folks called the Yazidis. I don't know if you're familiar with them or not. Peacock Throne. They were viewed as a religion and a cult, depending on which interpreter you're talking to, right? But at the same time, there's also a Roman Catholic parish north of Mosul that was also referred to as a cult, right? And so they view Christianity a lot of times as a cult and obviously not following Allah and whatnot.
Right.
So to everybody's point, it's very much a perspective or a bias where you're coming from, what lens you're looking through as to whether you define something as a cult or as a religion. And it's more or less what society deems as accepted or versus extreme.
Right. Yeah. And I agree with that. Yeah. And see, I think I understand what you're saying.
Understand where I'm coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. Because one of the problems I had, looking at this stuff is there, I read, articles from preachers, whatever, and they would give the definition. It's like, okay, that's great, but this is coming from a preacher's definition. Like the definitions here is like this is Encyclopedia Britannica or whatever. So it's kind of how we use it. But again, like I don't want to get wrapped up necessarily the word cult because again, like I would use it as an expedient of so we all understand what we're talking about. So it's okay if we look at it from the bias of a Christian because that's how we're wanting to look at it. And so we'll look at how do maybe cults that we define cults compared to what the Bible says about, say, the church or that organization. Have you all experienced any cults in your life that were
people that are part of
correct?
I mean, if you're counting JW as a Mormon, yes.
Yeah. I don't know, are you kind of Jada more?
Those are hard for me.
Yeah.
It comes down to the secret knowledge stuff.
Yeah, totally.
That flag checks the whole box for me, and the Mormonism definitely has the secret knowledge stuff.
So let's kind of go in there. So qualities, tactics. What do y'all think of when you think of cult? We were talking about some of them earlier, secret knowledge, you know, kind of an elitist type mentality, charismatic leader. I would say this is like one of those things I've seen at least that it doesn't have to check all the boxes, but it usually checks a bunch of the boxes. So quest for power. Like
Scientology uses their own kind of language and terminology
Yeah.
as a way to further isolate the members.
Are going to have something they offer that people are looking for.
Mhm.
And they're probably all going to be different, but I mean, even like you mentioned communism, I mean, that's something that is going to speak to people who are feeling oppressed. You know, the Branch Davidians, or, you know, some of these other groups, they're going to you know, gangs. I mean, they offer
Yeah,
like a
right,
family
right.
environment for those that, you know, may have had a hard life or whatever. So there's always some kind of hook that they're going to be using to draw people in, and they're going to be looking for a certain kind of person to come after.
exactly. Yeah, and that's honestly also one of the reasons, kind of alluding to what you're saying, that I didn't want to just pigeonhole this to kind of the radical, like weird cults that we think of, because how many of us have not been tempted, to say the least, to join the Branch Davidians or whatever? Like that's not something like it's very easiest for like, no way, can't even see it. Like, but what about things along the lines of, you know, charismatic political leader or whatever? It's like, well, those are dangerous. You know, those I actually can have some type of impact on my life.
So, right. Scientology uses self-help and personality tests. That's if you ever walk past their orgs, they always offer a free personality test, and it's one they've made up. But they use that to screen for people who will think for themselves and bounce you out of the door faster. And
I
then
didn't know.
no matter what your personality is, Scientology's always got an answer to fix you. So their test is obviously rigged to their system. But it's the trying to find either a closeness to God, which is what the Branch Davidians were looking for. They were a branch off the Seventh-day Adventists, which I learned that recently. The self-help guys like Nexium started out as self-help and business
Self-help's
advice.
a big one. I mean,
Yeah.
that I looked up as far as like I was looking at it.
Mhm.
I mean, political, racial, there's like a whole doomsday, there's different doomsday type scenarios, self-improvement, climate, if you want to talk, you know, and then even corporate. I mean, I worked for a company that were like, oh, that's like a cult. And people throw those terms around, you're like, oh, I can see that. You know, like, I mean, all these different things, it's like, well, the company does try to do this. And it's not necessarily a cult, but
It's part of the
depends on how you
controlling.
use the word.
It's part of the controlling behaviors.
Right.
The not being allowed to ask questions, either about the history of the group or the teachings of the group, whether
Question.
they've changed over time,
Yeah.
or the time and money control.
They'll see a lot of there's one set of rules for the leaders,
Yes.
and it's another set of rules for, you know, the lay people or, you know, normal members.
But it's always it does affect honest people. Like I said, I spend way too much time listening to apostates of Scientology because I'm fascinated by that specific one, because their leaders are not sexually deviant, and that is so curious to me because so many of the cults, the charismatic leader has some sort of
It's somewhere there.
perversion to it, but that one doesn't. But a lot of them were born into it, and you can tell they're honest, sincere people, good high qualities, and now they're so emotionally damaged by their experience. I sit there thinking, how would you ever speak to someone who came out of this? I don't know how you could ever convince them to trust to even open the Bible.
Right. It's like I have common ground, where it's like, where do you even start? Or Islam, you know, where do you literally have nothing in common, you know, a lot of the time. So it's hard to, you know, and how you specifically, yeah, exactly. How you specifically look at the world, a lot of things completely different. What do you all think? How does the church differ from?
Decentralized.
Yeah, very good. Yeah. Here, so this was Some of the ones that I picked out on here, we have scriptures for all these on page 5. Sole source of information is the Bible. So,
And unchanging.
right, that's a great point. So, I mean, you could argue interpretation or anything, but the Bible itself is like, this isn't interpretation from man, it's from God. So, sole source of information is the Bible. We don't have creed books; those things don't change. Doesn't get changed at all. Independent, localized leadership from among the people. So these aren't a lot of the Catholic churches, that will bring in priests or someone else from another area to take over. And this is, that's not the way with the eldership or the leadership from the church. And one I thought was really good is everyone's accountable to God's laws, especially the leaders. Like it's from their side, and correct me if I'm misinterpreting anything, but like it's a stewardship thing. It's not your organization, it's Christ. And you are simply a steward of that church. So those people.
We can say that the leaders in the church are actually held to a higher standard than us as a group, individual Christians.
Right.
Because they're
Being above reproach, even not even looking like. Yeah, that's a good point.
so there's a higher standard than the leaders versus the opposites. In most cults, you have the opposite.
Right.
And even in the local leadership, there's not one.
That's a great point.
So,
I
so
didn't
you have,
even put that on.
so the shepherds are actually shepherding each other at the same time. It's that you're holding each other accountable for upholding the one source of information.
Right. That's a good. Um,
Another thing is it's also easier to leave.
easier to leave.
Yeah, you can turn around and walk out the door and never come back, and you'll get phone calls and cards, but you don't have to be smuggled out.
Right. That's a good point. That's a really good point. Where people aren't going to come at your door and rip you out of your bed, steal all your assets. And, yeah.
Or stalk you.
Or kill you.
Yeah.
I mean, the when we get into the stuff about Islam, I mean, there are examples in the U.S. of girls being apostates and leaving to go marry a Christian or something, and they're honor killings. They go, that's only Pakistan or whatever. So no, it's crazy to think about. At least.
So Brian, my nanny thought the church was a cult. And I think these are things that it's not a cult if you're in it and you have the knowledge about it. But like in her small town in, way North Texas in 1930,
Right.
in her community, the Church of Christ there, I think, did appear like a cult because the women could not wear pants, they did not wear makeup, they did not cut their hair, like they did all those kind of things, and they definitely did not wear shorts because she told me that when I married her, that I would never be allowed to wear shorts. Which is not true. But I think
Wade shouldn't wear
they were very just stuck to themselves. I think they didn't.
Yeah.
The group that she was around did not do a good job of
They're outside the world.
being
Yeah.
good examples of being kind to the rest of the
That's
community.
awesome.
And they were very inclusive or seclusive, I guess, with each other. And they didn't do the things that the church is supposed to do. So, and they were very judgmental and not nice. And I think in a lot of ways, it did appear like a cult to her. So it also depends, I think, on who your examples are of the members and how they behave.
Yeah. No, it's like that's my last slide. So if I don't get to it, you covered it.
One thing Joe said stuck out to me, that we can ask questions. Because a lot of people, I think, even just they go to Bible churches around town, they would consider us because of just how strict we are.
Absolutely.
But the fact that we can ask questions and we can discuss it and just look at the Bible and not be like, oh, we don't ask that question. We don't discuss that. Yes.
Well,
No, to that point though, so I grew up Catholic. First time I ever set foot in this building, it was a preacher sub that day, but he got through with his lesson, and at the end he said, basically, don't take everything that I've said, for gospel.
Yeah.
Investigate it for yourself and make sure that it's the truth. And I was like, what?
Right. Yeah. That's one of those things when I came on. When I became a Christian, that was one of the things that was really shocking was that well, don't take my word for it. Look it up. Talk about it.
You're the guy,
You're
you're
the
up
pastor.
at
What are you
the
talking about?
pulpit.
Exactly.
I was just gonna say, to your point, I was raised in the Baptist church, you know, and when Adam and I started dating, we went to church together, and I came to church, and I was just shocked at how much Bible they were giving us the Bible verses, and I was like, I can't believe this. My main thing was always, well, do you have to be baptized or not? It says right here, and of course they gave the invitation, and so I was just shocked. But anyway.
My brother-in-law was raised Catholic, not Chris, Mike. Chris was raised Baptist. And Mike had started reading the Bible for himself when he met Rosalie. And he read Ephesians about we sing. And he said, huh, that's interesting. So he took it to his priest and he said, this is really clear what this says. Why don't we do this? And his priest said to my brother-in-law, the one with the PhD in biomechanical engineering, you can't understand that. And he said, but I can read. And I do understand that. And that's what finally broke the, what do you mean I can't understand this? It was so insulting to him that he said, well, what else does this say that you're not telling me it
Exactly.
says?
No, that's, yeah, that's exactly. Kind of in the news, this is from the 5th of April. I don't know what today is, like a couple days ago. What's today? Sunday. So this, a mom guilty of killing her kids, so her kids were like zombies or something else. I mean, this stuff's all around us. The next class can be on conspiracy theories. It's like a Venn diagram. There's a lot of that stuff that overlaps. So a lot of things, conspiracy theories, going to be in the kind of cults, and you could argue one or the other. But it's totally there. Is it simple to be a member of the cult? This is a trick question. It's totally one.
If you're putting your faith in a man, then yes.
That's a great way to answer the question.
It depends.
Yeah.
It depends if it's our definition here or if it's the world's definition. Right. Because like we said, we're a member of a cult according to the world. The cult is, it's always something negative too. You kind of think you glossed over that. Nobody ever is in a cult and said, hey, I'm going to go be in a cult.
Yeah.
They say, I'm going to be in this group. They never, ever call it that. And that's fine. That's just what we call it. And you said some of that, but it's like, it's always a negative connotation. So is it sinful to be a member of a cult? Just depends. Depends on how you define it.
It's a,
Who's in it and what you're calling each other.
yeah. Not only good at that, but that's a great way of putting it. So no, I'm just kidding. No, that's exactly, those two things is exactly kind of how I wanted to look at it. One other thought, 1 Corinthians 6:12. All things are lawful for me, but all things are not helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be brought under the power of any. So overemphasis on, this is the way. You know, Mandalorian's big right now. Like people have said that a lot. Like, oh, whatever it is that is the way, that's not Christ in the Bible. Be very, 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 very careful, because odds are like they're selling you something.
Well, that goes back to just the definition of idolatry. If anything's
Yeah,
taking up
that's
your
very good.
time and your brain and your money more than the Lord, then it has become an idol to you, and you have to take it out of your life.
Yeah, that's great.
What you just said.
So time, let's say, so someone in your life. So another thing, the video that I referenced said 2/3 of people that join cults were introduced by either friends or family. So it's people you trust. So outside, like, oh, that person's weird, I'm not doing that. Oh, my mom, like, oh, you know, I love you. What's going on? And so there's that little trust. What are some traits you think of? Let's say if a family member of yours started having these traits, what would they be? Time, we talked about.
Sometimes they become withdrawn.
Change behavior.
They don't spend time with their family or old friends.
Right.
Which can also be becoming a Christian.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I forgot to pronounce this other thing. So guarding our hearts against these types of worldly temptations, we don't think.
Being filled with the truth.
Focus on that. Thinking for yourself.
Yeah, making a commitment that you're always going to seek truth. Like, and if someone tells you something differently, then that's when you turn into high gear and make sure you're always that's one thing that I remember when we were speaking with some Jehovah's Witnesses that came to our house, and one of their elders came over and we were asking some questions very politely. He said, this is not stump the witness time. And I said, man, you're coming into our house telling me something that's extremely different from what I believe and to change my entire existence. Of course, we're gonna ask questions.
That's a red flag in of itself, right?
Right. So
They get in
always,
trouble. with
but you need to make a commitment to yourself to always ask questions.
If you get their missionaries coming back asking questions, your house will get put on the blacklist and you will not get JWs at your door again.
Really?
We're blacklisted.
All right, yeah.
Yeah, I had to study with some JWs for a while, and I was like, is it it? No. That's a good question. Yeah, we had a study, and after a while, it was they brought someone else. One, it's always two, which I mean I can understand that just from a temptation standpoint or whatever. But then it was like, well, hey, you know, you're asking good questions. Like, let's bring someone else in, and then it's like, here's my preacher, or whatever he is. You know, like you think for yourself, man. One of the problems I had with them, and we will get into JW stuff, was over reliance on JW.org. I was like, oh, you have a question? I'll send you a link. Like, I don't want your link, but you want, you know, and I have to spend 5 hours dissecting all the reasons why this is wrong. So it's very much, you know, find the question, send it, and I'm not thinking at all.
But you asked a question, how we can protect our children from these influences is actually taking the time to talk with our children about why we are actually doing what we're doing.
It's a great, yeah.
If we don't, oh, that's just what we do in our family. That's not a good answer. You know, that's how we've always, oh, this is what I've always been taught. This, oh, well, you know, just listen to the preacher. No, you need to actually tell your children why it is you're doing what you're doing and help them come to those understanding the reason to it. They're not going to be with you forever. They're going to have to make decisions on their own when they leave their house or even before they leave your house sometimes. So that would be a strong suggestion on that.
And that's kind of a cultural thing within the church too, is having that mentality of, you know, don't trust me, look at this, like, let's all rightly divide, find our own, or not our own path. That sounds hedonistic, but find what is the truth. We're all going to give account. If you knew that, so just a war analogy, if you know you're going into combat, then you want your people you're with working out and doing all kinds of training, but guess what? You're doing it too. Because you're like, this comes down to it, like all my stuff's gonna work, you know. So you have that accountability, and you have that we expect that of everyone else. And you don't mind if they come up and question you, like, hey, let me see all your stuff. Like, are you good? Like, yeah, check me out, make sure I'm good, I'll make sure you're good. And you have that mentality with each other. Was there a hand? I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, it's not only knowing what you know, but also understanding the enemy. But like you're saying before, what their tactics are, how to kind of combat it to a degree. You can't just say, well, this is what's good, and then not look at what's bad as well. You kind of have to look at what's bad and see, okay, why is it bad?
Right, and that's the whole reason for this class. You know, so exactly, and you know, I draw some. Hopefully, it doesn't come across as confusion with like, hey, let's talk about what is a cult. But again, the definition can be a whole wide array of things, and so like if maybe we look at it a little differently, maybe that might have more of an impact on each of us. Let's see what's like.
But knowing that people do view us that way, then we understand how to unravel that for them.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's where that is where we're going. How would you approach someone with this to get them? Like, what would you ask them? What kind of questions? How would you get them to think? What do you think? And is there a difference between a religious cult and say a secular cult? You ever talk to someone that is a vegan? They'll probably tell you. They'll tell you they're. No, that's. I'm just like, but like there are such things as secular cults, and like there could be some. That's it. Yeah, exactly. Totally. Actually, yeah. Yeah, they should have put that on there. North Korea, Texas A&M.
Yeah. Yeah.
Eric?
I think you have to find where they are,
Yeah.
understand where they're at that point, and then you can start.
How do you do that?
I mean, it's just saying, hey, what do you believe? What is it that you believe in, and all that kind of stuff? Because somebody that might be in a religious cult may not be the same as a secular, and you can start at two very different points.
Yeah.
So maybe the person in the religious understands Jesus and what he did and all that. It's like, okay, well, there's a starting point.
Find somewhat common ground.
The other person, you know, who's Jesus? Is he a priest? Like,
Yeah.
What is he? So just finding that starting point.
Just
always like, is anything not to be offensive and, or, automatically calling them crazy or laughing at them. Because it's truly what they believe.
Yeah.
So, and if you laugh at them, stop it. They're not gonna trust you.
Right. That's getting kindness and, seeking to understand first and love for them. Right.
And these are, I mean, you're right. These are all people and these are souls that we need to be seeking. But when you're talking to them, use their terminology, like flip through whatever materials they have, find what they call things, call it that as you're talking to them. And that won't turn them off. Because if you even start using scripture, you'll start turning them off because it's not their terminology. You're talking the same thing sometimes, but as much as you can, know it well enough to use what they call things so that you can have those conversations.
It's hard.
It's hard. That's why you jump into it before you talk to them.
So I grew up in the Lutheran church and I never really knew why we went to the Lutheran church. My parents would just drop us off and go eat breakfast.
Babysitting, that's what
I never really understood why I believed what I believed, but when I started talking to Tracy and she brought me to church, I'm like, well, if I'm going with you, you're going with me. So I made her come to church and it happened to be Palm Sunday. And so, they're going down the aisle with us, with the incense. And she's like, why do you believe this? I'm like, well, why do you believe what you believe? And that's how the conversation starts. You have to have a common theme of what to talk about and why you believe what you believe. So long story short, you don't always believe where you go. You just sometimes go because you're told to go.
Right. Yeah. And then remember, like you said earlier, about I don't know if this is true, but it referenced the video. 2/3 of people in cults or someone that's the person you're going to have interaction with. So you already should have some type of common ground, you would think. So you could focus there, build up some type of rapport.
I think we need to be aware of Christians who were raised in the church who have never sought their own answers.
Yep.
And if you identify that, you'll catch it in small things they say. Like, I grew up with this very dear friend, and finally by the time his dad was an elder, and by the time his dad was not qualified to be an elder, but his dad was an elder. And by the time he reached college, he said, well, I don't see any difference between us and the Baptist down the street. And I was like, okay. And then, big shock of shock, he's way off into worldliness now.
Yeah.
It was because he never had a personal faith. And so there's that danger of if you find your own blind spots that you've never sought out the evidences for, then seek out the evidences for that blind spot and make sure
Well, so in that type, along that same route, can a local church go down that path?
Yeah.
So we talked about decentralized is kind of how at least the inspired organization is for large church. Can an individual church kind of go down this path? And that's talked about earlier. I agree with you. I wanted to go down that road. So does anyone think that?
If there's I think if there's a strong, for a lot of reasons, but if there's a strong personality that's one of the elders and the other elders cower to that one, then
Not even elders.
well, I'm just saying in the organization of the church,
Sure.
a local church, then it could basically just squelch any questions like, hey, don't question us, don't question what we do. We're smarter than you. We know what we're, you could take the same tack. And if congregations are not, actually well grounded in their own faith, they may just cower and accept. And there's also terminology that we can use and just use that accommodatively as kind of our own language of how we call things. What we say.
Let me ask you, because I've been a member of churches like that. And usually it wasn't with elders, it was like either a preacher or one of the older men, or even maybe an elder. How would you, if you were in my situation, how would you approach that? If you saw that as a danger and you felt convicted enough, what would you do?
Well, I've kind of been in that situation where there's a very strong, charismatic man who is serving as a new elder and began to teach all kinds of different kind of out there ideas that were not scriptural. Well, we actually, as a young man, went to that man and said, hey, I need to talk with you about this. This is what you're teaching is not really what the Bible, as far as I know, I'm a lot younger than you, but you got to show me. And we went to several, I said, I still don't see it, brother. This is not, that you're teaching error. I mean, this is not right. And you need to stop doing this. And we had a woman who said, I can be an elderess, you don't have to be a man to be an elder. And I was just like, what's here, you know? And we went to that, they got very mad.
Yeah.
They were so mad. But you know what? That church is still in existence today and has faithful men who are elders. Who are certain, because people didn't accept error. You can't accept it. But I didn't stand up and yell at them.
It's all the biblical pattern.
Yeah.
Follow the course.
Thank you. It's a perfect place to end. Because we have to. Thank you very much.